Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs et les autres. Je suis Layman Pascal on behalf of myself, Bruce Alderman, and whatever dubiously named emergent integrative meta community we seem to be representing. I'm out in front, so you don't have to be. As you might be aware, the integral stage has been revising or revisiting some of the sages of the past who might still be relevant for the so-called time between worlds. As part of that project, I've held some discussions recently about the iconoclastic Greco-Armenian philosopher sage G.I. Gurdjieff, who I feel is very much in need of interesting, energetic, and creative extensions of his core ideas. And in response to some of that work, we were contacted by one Brian Simonitsch from the Rowdojo Project, which, as you might be able to guess from the name, combines the sacred physical spirit of martial arts dojos with a unique approach to exercises such as rowing and some kind of perverse spiritual cross-training. So we're going to talk with Brian about Gurdjieff, meditation, the principle of three-centered exercise, the role of the body in healing and existential development, and all that kind of stuff. It's time to relax and move. Hi, Brian. How was that?
Layman, thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Let's start with why you reached out to us. What was on your mind? What were you thinking?
Yeah, so I've been following your podcast recently, and I saw your discussion with Trevor regarding the Gurdjieff work, and I've been involved with it for maybe about 5 years, and I've been working on a system which incorporates the three centers, which in my opinion is one of the most important aspects of the Gurdjieff teaching. And so, it can be hard to find people that are familiar with it and knowledgeable about it. And through your work, I realized that you are, and you thought you'd be a good person to talk to.
Fantastic. What's your deeper background in like spirituality and physical exercise? What's a little bit of your autobiography in terms of your interest both in working the body and also in developing being?
Yeah, so in my late 20s, I came to a realization that I needed a lifestyle change and decided to put my health as my priority. And in doing that, I used the rowing machine as a way to gain my strength and mobility back. And I realized that the rowing machine is an excellent tool because it's a slow, repetitive motion that I refer to as the movement mantra. And it's that simplicity and repetition that can help people relax and get into a meditative or flow state during exercise. And it doesn't matter, what your current, or any age or athletic ability, anybody can sit on a rower and row back and forth and just move the body. And that's step one. And once they get used to that, then you can bring in the breath and then you turn it into more meditative. And so I pretty much developed the same system that I use to get my own health back. And now I'm trying to bring it out to other people. For the past few years, the studio was called Heel Hop Rowing, and it's specialized in meditative rowing. But, meditation isn't for everybody. And I'd have people that would come in, then you don't really see them for a while. It just wasn't a sustainable business. And so what I've been doing over the past year, pretty much shut down after COVID and then started from scratch rebuilding as the Rowdojo. And it's going to be more traditional exercise with just a little bit of drops of meditation. And then when people are ready, we can go deeper. But it's not, meditation isn't a one size fits all thing. Everyone's at a different place with it. And I think it needs that personal attention. So that's where I'm at. And so now it's getting out, talking to people such as yourself and just and trying to explain, what it is, what it can do for people, how to work the mind and the body, and how strengthening that connection can improve people's lives.
There's two interesting complementary questions for me around the role of physical exercise. So from each side. So from the one side, what's missing, generally speaking? You mentioned meditation, you mentioned flow states, but when people go to the gym, when you've gone to the gym, when you've done other people's physical exercise programs, what makes that insufficient?
Because they're not really connecting. They're doing it almost mechanically, so they're going and they're doing 3 reps of, or 10 reps, 3 sets of bench press, and they're just doing it as in a mechanical fashion. They're not really connecting with their breath as much as they could be. They're not slowing it down. They're moving at the pace of life. And when you come in to the Rowdojo, everything slows down. And that in itself can be a challenge for people. But I believe it's important to do in order to get the most out of their workout. You know, you can work the body, but how do you work the mind? You know, how is that done? And in my opinion, it's done through attention and concentration and focus on the physical sensations of the body. And you start small because people will find out very quickly they can really only hold attention on the body for a short amount of time. But with time and practice, you can improve on that. And that is the strengthening of that mind-body connection. It's with attention, focus, you know, sensing, feeling the whole organism, and not just pushing up as much weight as you can or running as fast as you can. You know, you should be sensing it and feeling it and thinking as well. And that's when we get into the three centers.
So the mental component in all of this is partly directed attention toward these sensations and movements and experience of the body, and partly towards some other kinds of thinking projects that people might be directed to do while they're rowing or performing other activities?
Yeah, so there'd be two other ways to activate the thinking center. And number one would be, actually say three ways. Number one would be to visualize. And so you're actually, while you're rowing, you're visualizing the movements of the joints. You can visualize the contraction of the muscles, and you can visualize the heart beating or visualize the lungs inflating. All these things are going to get you a deeper connection with your body that you inhabit, right? So you can do visualizations, you can do creative exercises where sometimes I'll just put like a little canvas on a tripod and while they're rowing, it's all right, now just focus your attention on what you might want to put on this, and try to pull something out of your imagination and put it on canvas once you're done exercising. And then the third thing would be if they're dealing with an issue or a problem, let's not complain about it. Let's apply your higher intelligence on how to solve it. And that is a way for them to maybe resolve some problems or figure out what they want to do with their lives, or how to move forward with whatever they're dealing with.
And what about the heart? What's the role of emotion in this kind of exercise?
Yeah, so emotion's very interesting, and it's actually, of the three centers, it's my weakest component. And I've been working on it myself, and in my own learning, I think I can apply a lot of the principles to this. But basically, we don't want to suppress what we're feeling. We really want to go into it, feel it all the way through, and use it as something to grow. And we want to look at those emotions not with judgment, but with curiosity and wonder. What are they trying to show us? And don't be afraid of them. Like they're there to help us learn. And just getting some basic fundamental knowledge on what the emotions are, how they move through the body, how they're stored in the body, it can be really useful, because a lot of times, especially for people who are really heavy in the head, they're just neglecting that entire region. And Gurdjieff says that we're three-brained beings, and he says that repeatedly throughout the tales. And if he repeats something, he means it's important. And just how humans are referred to as three-brained beings, that was my signal. Okay, I need to go deeper into my own emotions so I can be a more full human, and not neglect them and don't stay stuck in the head. And for me, it's been, I don't know, it's been a journey, because you realize how much you're blocked off from them. And and they're not always bad. I mean, they can be really good, but if you're blocked off from the good ones, you're also blocked off from the bad ones. And it's not, that's not a good place to be.
What sorts of experiences or changes in your experiencing have you observed over the last little while of doing this kind of work?
So I'll say on the good side of things, I felt joy and gratitude in ways that I had never felt before. And if you would have asked me, are you joyful? Like, oh yeah, sure, but that's just my head, telling me that I am. But to really, feel it is, I mean, that to me has been the best thing. And that's just a higher vibration that I think I wouldn't have been able to come to without really looking more deeply at myself and, life experiences and things that have been suppressed and things that I haven't looked at before. I've had the help of a teacher as well. And I think that's crucial in order to go through this because, it's, as it's a maze, and another thing Gurdjieff says is one must learn from he who knows. And I think rings very true for me.
What kind of reports or feedback do you get from people who are working with the exercises as you're laying them out for them in the Rowdojo?
The feedback's all been very good. And even when it was just the meditative rowing, people are able to calm down to a level that otherwise they are not able to. And so even though it was still, under development, I still knew that there's something here, because the 3 centers, like to me, that's just a fact. So I know that there's more to work on, more to look into, more things for people to try. And then you take their feedback. Hey, what do you think? And then just continue to evolve. But yeah, I mean, I've had some clients who I think just by being exposed to the ideas, that in itself is a boost for them. It's just to hear things or to have things put in front of them in ways that they've never seen before, or maybe new theories or new concepts. It's just anytime you're exposed to new and interesting things, it's going to give you a boost. And to leave that workout, they would always say like, "Oh, wow, that was different, that was cool." And that alone, it's something. It breaks the monotony, and I think it's so important to do that.
Yeah, I think the basic frame itself is very powerful. First of all, to think of the self as a plurality, as a community, and to identify these different functions, and then to think about trying to exercise them all and maybe balance them out or something like that. It makes a tremendous arena of richness in your inner life. Like whether you succeed or fail, there's all this stuff to explore and play with once you start thinking of yourself in that way.
Exactly. And another thing I do just to make the experience new and different. And I've also been involved with a little bit of Spinoza. And Spinoza he said he was always seeking something new and different. And I try to take that philosophy into what I do as well. And when it comes to music, the music is a mixture of reggae and lo-fi hip hop. And you're not going to find that in very many gyms or studios around the country. And so, reggae is something that, it has a certain vibration that does something to you. Like no one's ever upset when they're listening to reggae. It seems to be a very happy, calming, relaxing sound, and that's not only heard by our ears, but also by our entire body. Our cells absorb those vibrations. And so if someone is out of shape or if they're feeling vulnerable, that's going to help them relax and they're going to have fun. And that is the most important thing, because if you're not relaxed and you're not having fun, then I'm not doing my job, and you're not going to come back. So I use music as a way to kind of set the tone for what I do, how I want them to feel. There's no pressure. It's no pressure, just fun fitness.
There's 2 really interesting Gurdjieffian themes in that. One is his interest in the objective or general physiological and emotional responses we have to music in particular, but to art in general. The other one is this sense of novelty. I think Trevor and I talked about this because this is a very unique, interesting, lively, serious, but also fun, strange, artistic, iconoclastic character, which sets it apart from a lot of the other spiritual traditions in which there's a very dry, sober, conformist, idealistic kind of teaching. For you personally, but maybe for the culture as well, how important do you think it is for a spiritual mentor to be a novel, interesting, fun, peculiar person?
I think it's crucial because isn't that our goal for ourselves too? Is to become a novel, interesting person? So you have to see it in someone else. And in order to be, you have to learn from someone who is. and you have to be, learn, be around, and it's more than just words. A lot of times people, they're just stuck on the words, they're just reading the books. But then we talk about, the knowledge and being. We need both. And a lot of people in ours, they're stuck in the knowledge, and they know a lot of things, but they aren't. And that's one of the, most important things about being novel and different and unique. You have to embrace your uniqueness and embrace your unique ideas. And, it could be uncomfortable at times, and it takes maybe a little bit of courage, but it is something that if you really want to be, individualized, I guess you could say, like, you have to understand that. And, that's how I live, and it's how I represent the Gurdjieff work. I can't explain to people, exactly what it is, or, how it works, or, or claim that I even understand it, but I can try to act and be a way which represents it and represents his ideas. And he did one, he also says, don't do as anyone else does. And I think that's a very simple and powerful message that should resonate with a lot of people.
So what's your experience of other people who are in this work? Because there's always been a little bit of a tension between people who like that rich human creative side of him, and the tendency of the last couple generations of Gurdjieff groups to maybe be a little bit too sober, a little bit too conformist, a little bit too self-controlling and constantly self-observing and things like that. So some groups have tended to be very lively, and other groups have tended to be a little bit more, let's just say self-controlling, self-watching, and conformist. What's your sense of the ones you've interacted with?
Yeah, so I've been in a few different groups, and I think it's been very valuable for me because I've seen the different, methodologies that they use, the different formats that they're done in. Some of them are more strict, some of them are less strict, some of them are more serious and conformist, and others are not. It just varies, and I think that's just the perfect example of how the teaching is it's unfolding. It's always unfolding, and you're going to get people that go this way, and there's going to be people that go that way. But at the same time, I don't really think that there's a right or wrong way. It's if people feel comfortable or think that that a more conformist way is better, they're free to do that. And then if there's people that don't, they're free to do that. Like, he didn't put in rules or guidelines like that. He let people figure it out for themselves. And I think that's another thing that's there's not very many traditions that do that. And I think that helps people free themselves up from all these, from the conditioning and the programming that they might get from other traditions.
In the West, in the late 20th century, there was a lot of interest in effortlessness and doing by not doing and things like that, spiritual practices of release and relinquishment and stillness and surrender. And there's something to be said for those practices. But the Gurdjieff tradition emphasizes effort, emphasizes doing. And it seems like that makes it very compatible with athletics, physical exercise, things like that, where there is a culture of push a little bit, make an effort, put yourself at stake in the activity. What's your sense? How do you balance effort and effortlessness in the way you think about all these things?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because especially when it comes to athletics, you can't fake a mile run, and a lot of times when it comes to intellectual things, when people are in their heads, a lot of them are just in their imagination. But your physical body is, that's reality. And it's not just theorizing. I think a lot of the problems with spirituality stuff is it's a lot of theorizing, it's a lot of talking, but not enough doing. And doing is, what we're here to try to accomplish. And it can be uncomfortable though, and it takes effort. And a lot of times it needs it has to be confronted. It's not something you can just tell yourself that you're doing. You need to actually do it. And when we're talking about the emotions before, when you're pushed from theorizing to doing, there's that effort and uncomfortableness in between. And that's where the emotional control comes in. Okay. Like we have to, kind of get through those barriers that everybody feels and everyone comes up on the journey from, from thinking to doing. That's the emotions a lot of times get in the way. And so by becoming more control of the emotions, we're able to actually do more. But without control of the emotions, they're going to continue to block us from where we want to go. Or you can, that's what was his term of buffers. It's those buffers that we're blind to that don't let us see who we really are and what we need to do.
This reminds me of a recent interview I saw. I think it was Joe Rogan was on Lex Friedman's podcast, and they were discussing physical efforts and challenges. And Rogan's comment was something to the effect that people who dismiss physical challenges as being merely physical are people who haven't undergone physical challenges, because when you go through it, you realize how much intelligence is involved in figuring out where to put effort in, where to pull back, how to adjust yourself, how to regulate your emotions, how to stay focused. There's a huge number of sophisticated tasks you have to perform in a challenging or difficult physical activity that people who don't participate in that seldom are aware of. So that becomes very easy to sort of put the body aside and not understand what an avatar of generalized human intelligence it really is.
Yeah, very true. And you're gonna feel sensations that otherwise you would never feel. So that's a more full human experience. It's feeling the tightness of the muscles and feeling the lungs gasping for air. And I look at we talk about conscious suffering. There's a reason why it's so important, because you feel it and you'll get to know your body better. You'll have more, faith in your body, that it knows what it's doing and it can help, it can heal itself, it can strengthen itself, if it can become more mobile. But you're only going to know that by putting in the effort and then in feeling the recovery. Like, yes, you're going to have soreness, but that's just the body waking up, and it's required for growth. And just mental effort, emotional effort, physical effort, there are rewards there, and that's why we do it.
One of the things that would be very difficult to get across in a conversation like this to people who are watching or listening is, for me, the exquisiteness of what happens when you've been trying to make efforts in 3 different centers for a while, and then suddenly you succeed at sort of pushing in the same degree in all 3 zones, and you feel them line up and harmonize, and you get this additional feeling that is at once powerful and luxurious and relaxing and true, just a generalized beingness feeling. So I hope that it doesn't seem abstract to people, and that but it definitely will to some degree if you haven't had that experience. But it is just one of the most fascinating internal experiences you can have, is to feel those centers in effort line up and become some greater thing than the parts. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think there's many different terms for this feeling that have been described by all types of religions or spiritual circles. But one of the way I like to call it is it's the positive emotion, and or observation, impartiality, and simultaneity, all at the same time. And it's the reconciling force. So that it's not positive or negative, but yeah, it's something that's unique. And unfortunately, we can't be there all the time. But to get a glimpse is a very powerful thing, and attainable for everybody if they put in the work.
Do you think of it more, and I ask this because it's ambiguous in Gurdjieff. He describes it in different ways at different times. Do you think of it more as creating something, building something up, growing something, or rediscovering and reconnecting with something that's always already there?
I would say it's the reconnection, but just because I feel like it's something ancient, it has like an ancient quality to it, because he talks about how with all of our advancements in technology, all our advancements in industry, yes, they're great, but what have we lost from that? And I think one of the things that we've lost from all these conveniences and advancements is the ability to really connect with that. So I look at it more of a reconnecting.
Yeah, that sense of loss, that sense of honoring the ancient possibilities of human beings is really strong in his work.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful passage in Herald of the Coming Good, which I know he recommends people not read, but I think that makes it sound even more important, where he talks about, in a way very similar to Game B and Metamodern discussions about the current situation, where we have the technology of gods now, but not the wisdom of gods to use it. He describes modernity as a situation in which, if we were to actually inhabit it, we would truly be greater than our ancestors. But because our education is so lopsided and insignificant that we don't learn and grow as three-centered generalized beings, that our situation is in fact less than that of our ancestors, when it could be the greatest thing in history. But we're not really growing and adapting ourselves to the current situation. So we are then inferior to people who adapted themselves to much more primitive situations than the one that we live in. There's something beautiful about the possibility and the tragedy of all that.
Right. But by recognizing that fact, it makes us realize that we still have that power in ourselves. If we follow the model, or if we take the recommendations or do the work, there is still something that we as individuals can still connect with.
Who do you look to as good sources of physical information in terms of constantly staying up to date about how the body works, how exercise should be going, things like that? Who do you go to as a source of physical wisdom?
Yeah, so one of my favorites is a guy on YouTube called Red Shot Black Star, and he's a Jamaican out of Brooklyn, and he's 55 years old. He can do about 100 pull-ups and infinite amount of push-ups and run as long as he wants to. It's just an amazing physical specimen, but also very in tune spiritually. And I think he connects the two in a way that not very many other people can. And he says that how do you get involved with exercise? The best way, you crawl into it and you just start. And I always thought that resonated so much with me, because how many people, they try to go in with some type of expectation or some type of negative feeling, said they're not capable. But if you just say, I'm starting at the base, ground zero, and going up from there, it's the best way to do it. And it's just the outlook and that mindset is really, really powerful. So yeah, Red Shot Black Star on YouTube. He's probably, he's my number one.
Fabulous. Sounds like you've been looking for a while for people who combine the spiritual and the physical.
Yeah, because there's the thing about the spiritual is the risk of getting lost in imagination, and the physical to me keeps me grounded. And in the physical exercise, it's always true. This is how much you did today. It's still facts, and we need facts, no matter how much we're into the different teachings. And there's nothing more real than just feeling the burn of exercise, or doing some type of super effort, or feeling that recovery, or maybe dealing with an injury. That's as real as it gets to me. And that's really what we're after is what's real and what's true. And exercise for me provides that.
Recovery is interesting because I've always found that physical injuries are such a fantastic form of mindfulness, right? You're suddenly, if you injure, if you have to move differently and monitor a part of your body, you're suddenly attending to it with an intensity you seldom get if you just sit down to do physical mindfulness practices.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, that when you have an injury, that's, you can, I like to think of it as it's your body's way, an area of your body that's waking up a little bit, you know, and by waking up, you know, you could say that in healing, it becomes stronger. You know, the body itself is learning. You know, if you have you know, you pulled a muscle in the shoulder, now you're paying more attention to that shoulder than you ever have before. And it could just be a little bit of discomfort, but you're more focused on that than ever. And then you can even talk about the power of attention and healing. You know, if you're doing a sitting exercise and a body scanning and you're focusing full attention on that shoulder, you can start to feel a little bit of tingling sensations. And that sensation, like, what is that tingling? Is that chi? Gurdjieff called it the Handblad or Handbladzoin. You know, like, but what is that? What is it doing? What are we feeling there? You know, is that healing it? Is it strengthening it? Or is it maybe it's you know, it's doing some type of signal. You know, there's an intelligence there, and you're only gonna get if the healing is required, because then you're gonna be, okay, this pain is annoying me. I'm gonna focus. I'm gonna put in the tension that it needs, and now let's observe and let's look at it, you know, with a little bit of wondering curiosity, like, what is taking place during this process.
So a lot of people these days are using microdosing, particularly of psilocybin, when they engage in various physical activities. Do you think that aids or inhibits the kind of physical practice you're talking about?
So I don't have experience with psychedelics, so I'm not quite sure. But I would think that it's probably as close as you're going to get to that without having to take anything, you know. And it's, you know, Terence McKenna said one time that no one walks into an ashram with their knees shaking. You know what I mean? It's like that type of feeling. You know, if you're coming to a 30-minute meditation or with me on the rower, like, it's still kind of can be a serious thing. And I think psychedelics have that same effect. Like, you have to kind of, you know, you have to get centered. You have to, you know, it's a little bit of preparation for someone that's like, all right, let's go, start to row. And that's how it used to be. But I still might bring that back at some point. But as of right now, I'm going a little more traditional exercise. But when you're doing those, you know, those type of rows, you know, people are going to have to work through some things, and it's 30 minutes with themselves and with the breath. And there's a little bit of nervousness. That's probably why a lot of people never came back, is like, you know, it has that, you start with that same type of anxiety that I assume you would start if you were to take a heroic dose. You know, it's like, maybe not quite on that level, but like, you know, maybe a little bit of the same feeling. So exercise and psychedelics is really as interesting to me. Maybe I'll get into it at some point. But as of right now, I just haven't really felt the call, I guess you could say, to do it myself or research more into it.
There's something fascinating to me about that daunting feeling before a practice, right? Because we've got the residue of late capitalist consumer spirituality still with us, where it should sort of immediately affirm you and make you feel relaxed and comfortable. As opposed to, like you're saying, psychedelics, as opposed to physical exercise or even other physical practices. I like to go into the sensory deprivation tank, right? That can be daunting, or climbing a mountain, or even beholding someone who's an impressive spiritual exemplar. There's this experience of going, holy shit, that could be a lot. That I'm possibly taking a risk here, engaging in this. There's something really beautiful about that sets it apart from all the kinds of really gentle remedial spiritual practice, which may have their benefits, but they're all too easy to sell to people who don't really want to change or make any efforts.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And that's why I'm very careful to not, you know, I really don't like, you know, the idea of a charlatan, you know, who are selling people things. You know, this stuff, you know, it's hard if you really want results. It's, you know, it's hard to sell, because people feel that resistance. And, there's no quick fix, and you need to get into that. I love the dauntingness, where you can't, and that's the confrontation we were talking about. Yes, it is daunting because there's things that need to be confronted. And sometimes it's kind of yucky, right? You don't want to, but that's where the growth is. And that's what has to be done. And if you're worried about looking at it, you just have to remember to do it without judgment, and look at it with curiosity and wonder. And it'll help you do that. And then if you really start to feel it, just row harder, and then it's the catharsis where you can actually physically work through. And when you're rowing harder, you're getting more blood flowing, so it's moving all those emotions around. You're clearing them out. You're breathing heavy. You're feeding the body with every inhale. You're cleansing with every exhale. And you can really do some deep work that way. But you have to take that step or take that leap and really want to go into it. So now I still plan on doing some of those type of meditative rows, but it's only after I've gotten to know people from doing their traditional exercise. And then if they inquire about it, or if they're interested in it, then I can, we can definitely do them. But on a mass scale, it's, it has to wait. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of what they say about exposure therapy in psychology when you're trying to help somebody with a trauma or a phobia, that it's extremely healing for them to be in contact with the thing that distressed them. But the contact has to be voluntary, right? If you take a person who's afraid of spiders and throw spiders on them, that doesn't help. But if you can get them to a point where they agree to get nearer to a spider, then that helps them a lot. So it's got to have that intentional aspect to it, which is emphasized in this teaching.
Yeah, definitely. And also it's, with psychedelics being, you could say they're kind of trending right now. How many people are jumping right into them without proper preparation, or getting out of them without proper integration? And I think that's something that's not really discussed, because now money's involved, and we all know that, money corrupts things. And, is it going to continue to be, is that going to cause more problems than good? We don't know yet. It's still too early to tell. But I think there should be as much stress put on the preparation and the integration as there is the products themselves.
Well, speaking of integration, if somebody's in the Rowdojo, and whether it's just a pure physical exercise or whether they're working in a multi-center fashion, do you have advice for them about what to do with those experiences afterwards? Like when you leave the dojo, how do you assimilate what's gone on in the dojo?
So the first thing I say is, don't get into the car, blast your music and go right back to work. You want to keep that feeling with you for a little while, and just start there. Start there by trying to not jump right back into life, and see how long you can hold it for. And that's where they start. And then after that, we'll do a little bit of journaling, maybe write down just things that they want to discuss, and I'm not saying that I'm going to help them, or not, I'm not going to solve their problems, but through the right type of thinking, I can help them deal with and maybe help them solve their own problems. Someone came in last week, and usually it revolves around work, and she was trying to just please too many people. And I told her, how do you feel? Like, what do you want to do? And it put her in pause, and she's like, wow, I didn't even think about that. Because people are they're external considering all the time, and they're not listening themselves. And I said, just, follow your own conscience. And it's a simple piece of advice, but it's something that surprisingly people never hear, where you're, it's taking advice from others. They're not you, so take this time while you're exercising and focus on you. It's just me and you here. There's no one else, no distractions, no anything. And she felt, 10 times better after she left. And all it took was a little bit of movement, a little bit of relaxing, maybe a little bit of reggae music. And, and it completely switched her perspective. And it's just because there's a lack of good perspectives out there. And it's just so much conditioning and programming that people forget that they still have their own conscience to listen to.
Yeah, there's mindfulness is a very beautiful term, but there's something that a phrase like self-remembering, used in the Gurdjieff tradition, has that mindfulness doesn't have, which is this sense of your members, your parts. You're returning, you're remembering the fact that you have these different parts. And sometimes those parts are even just your own values and desires that, right? They're not gone, but you forget that they're there. You don't somehow think to check on them, even in important life situations.
Yeah, and it's strange, isn't it? Because the idea that, I mean, if you tell someone that they can't remember themselves, like right away, they're like, oh, yes, like there's immediate, rejection of that concept. But it's true. It really is, we're being pulled in all types of directions and in so many directions that the most important direction inward is blocked off.
The first time this really hit home for me was I leaned over to tie my shoelace and I straightened back up before I tied it. So I went almost all the way down and then I straightened back up. And then I was like, what the fuck? What I wanted to do was tie my shoelace. Where I like blanked out and didn't do it. It was very strange. I'd lost contact with my own values and intention in such a simple act. It was bizarre. And the sense of feeling that you are not only the watcher of yourself, in a way that you would sit down and just watch your thoughts and feelings arise, but almost like yourself is a kind of antagonist to what you're up to. And that there's some kind of strong engagement required to get yourself to be yourself. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And that seems to be, the main, I guess, source of resistance, and once you see how hard it is to overcome. And, simple things like, for me, it's like when you realize how difficult it is to, or to see these little addictions that we have, and it's almost impossible to quit them or to drop them. And then you're like, okay, here's my mechanical self that is just on autopilot all day, every day. Maybe I have a few minutes of some self-awareness or self-observation, but for the most part, here I am just going, just like one of those wind-up dolls. But that's, as Gurdjieff says, the terror of the situation. And we have to, try to work to get out of it. But it's a hard realization, I guess, but it's an important one because that's our starting point. We start at our realization of our nothingness. And to see it is a humbling thing, but at least that once you can see it, you can start on the way.
One of the things that I'm always curious about in this stuff is the role of the subconscious, because there's a great deal of surrealism in the way Gurdjieff communicates. And there's this sense early on in the tales where he says, you have two consciousnesses, and the one I think is your real consciousness is the one you call your subconsciousness. So what's your sense of the role of subconscious intelligence in health, in spirituality, and the things you're working on in the Gurdjieff tradition? How do you think about it generally?
And that's a just such a gigantic statement, right? that the subconscious is our real consciousness. And so for me, that's a call to go into it as much as you can, and it's where my attention is grounded. It's where I try to ground it, at least. But I think that the subconscious provides a little bit of a roadmap to give you the guidance that you're looking for. And one of his aims would be for us to get in contact with it and then listen to it. But in order to listen to it, we need to be multi-centered. And if you're not listening to it comes later. I've heard once, don't do anything for years. Just observe. Don't even try to change anything. Just observe and learn the machine. But once you can learn the machine a little bit, once you have your three centers aligned, and I guess once you have a magnetic center activated, then you have the ability to follow the subconscious. But other things have to be in order first. You know what I mean? And once they are, then that gives you the ability to follow it where you can. It's my opinion.
Oh, that's a nice image. I mean, obviously, there are lots of different ways in which the subconscious and unconscious intelligences present themselves to us. But to me, I find it fascinating to think about us as a kind of radio, and if you have your primary centers resonantly attuned with each other, suddenly this other radio station can start to come through properly.
Mm, great analogy. And then you can kind of find your frequency. And otherwise, there's too much static. But when you can find the frequency, and then you're listening. We could say that's the subconscious. Is you're listening. It's still in and out. There's still static there, but you can hear something, and there's something else. And I think that might relate also to, as you're talking about, the look from above, maybe, or that positive emotion. They all slowly start to piece together, but after much work on oneself. But I think what we're discussing now is kind of what we're going for. That's what we're hoping to attain or achieve.
Yeah, I like analogies like this because there's so much emphasis on tuning and harmonics and music frequency in his work, which really situates it well for an electric civilization, for a digital civilization, but also for people who appreciate not only vibes between people, but the richness of music and what it stands for in human experience.
Yeah, it's so important. And unfortunately, just like a lot of people their first being food, for their physical body is trash. The music is impressions for the thinking center. And a lot of that is trash. And they don't realize that what they're taking in musically it affects them in many ways. And if you have trash on repeat, what's that doing to the harmonious centers? Like, is it disrupting something if you're listening to bad repetitive music? And I think people should be more aware of what they are listening to and how it's affecting them. As I said, reggae affects your feelings very much as soon as you hear it. And for me, if I go out, I hear some music, it just sounds like nails. And you're just like, how could people deal with this? But they do, and they don't realize that it could possibly be doing harm. And I think that's one thing that about music that isn't ever really discussed. Yes, we know that music is natural medicine, right? They've been using it for ages for ways to heal people, to improve mood, but can it also be a toxin? And they don't hear about that much, but toxic music, I think, would be an interesting study, how it affects people. And there have been studies with how bad music relates to water. If you've seen those images. Have you seen those?
Yeah, the Emoto images of water crystals.
Yeah, exactly. So if that's what it does to water, what is it doing to neurons or brain cells? That would be interesting.
Yeah, I've heard different things about the science behind Emoto, but the general sense that something goes on with harmonic vibrations or disharmonic vibrations, that seems pretty undeniable in general. This notion of receiving impressions as food, right? A huge part of Gurdjieff's work, and in some ways the central part from some angles. And it's fascinating to try to think out what constitutes a healthy or unhealthy impression. I'm a big fan of Nietzsche, and one of the things Nietzsche was trying to do was to criticize Wagner's music as unhealthy, right? He would go, look, this is a great guy. He's truly a world historical genius. He's the greatest composer in our country, but it's bad for you. Don't listen to it. You should be listening to Bizet, was his example, right? And so for a modern person, it's really hard to even understand the differences between various forms of classical music, let alone determine whether one's good for you or not. But when I read that as a kid, I thought, I'd never considered this before, that some really good music that's brilliant, that people like, might nonetheless be bad for you. So how do you adjudicate between the fact that people like lots of different stuff and the fact that there's some other way where you might have to say to them, I know you love it, but it's bad?
Yeah, and it's all just my opinion too. People can listen to whatever they want, but it's the same thing as if someone comes into the Rowdojo and they're out of weight. And one of the first things, what's the first thing that you ask them? How's your diet? What are you eating that's affecting your physical body to make it look like the way it is? And if they say McDonald's and pizza, then we got to start there, and then if someone comes in and they're really, if they're, depressed or scattered, like what are you listening to? What do you listen to on the right here? And if they say, death metal, or if they say who?
The news. Like
100%, exactly. If you say death metal, say the news, then okay, let's start there. You can switch the diet of impressions the same way you switch the diet of the physical body. So I think it's extremely important, but a lot of times they're so used to eating burgers and pizza. They're so used to listening to the news. They're so used to listening to the top 40 radio, and I don't know about your parents, but every generation says this about their parents, but they do this and they do that, but that's what they're used to. That's it. And just like, it's hard for people to break their cycles, even when they're detrimental to their mental and physical well-being.
I like the way you put that, because this, one of the problem of one's own subjective evaluation of someone else's cultural taste, you can kind of put that aside if you just look at what the effects are on the person, right? If they're listening to a lot of something, if it was good for them, you would see better results. But if it's something you go, well, I don't understand how anybody could listen to that shit, but nonetheless, they seem to be pretty good. You're like, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. I don't know. It's, again, it's always like to each their own, and I'm never gonna, demand that people stop listening to whatever they want. No, but I can still give suggestions, and that's just all I can really do. And just say, look, maybe you cut this out, maybe you add this in, and just see what happens, see how you feel. But and even for us that are doing the work, I realize myself how hard it is to break some of these habits that I know are bad. They're not serving me, but it's just what I've been doing for so long. It's just like, and how can I expect someone else to just, oh yeah, sure, like done. But it's tough, but you start small and then you just continue to add on. And then the results that you see and you feel, then you use those as motivation to keep them going.
It seems to me that when a person's primary form of spirituality is something that affirms them without requiring much of them, and that might be a remedial necessity, right? A person might need to relax and heal and be affirmed. But generally speaking, when their spirituality isn't challenging them to struggle with themselves, they don't seem to develop a compassion and tolerance for other people, right? That it's the fact of constantly noticing how you fail to meet your own values that increase your ability to spontaneously take into account the fact that other people, of course, don't meet your values or their values either.
Right. And we're all, we're all in the same boat, right? But we're just in different, we're all at just different stages of our own individual journeys. And, but the thing about people who are, I guess, further along in their own journey, it's kind of their, I don't like the word responsibility, but there's maybe it is responsibility, to then go back and at least pass on what you've learned along your way to help others. And I think that's a lot of what drives me to do what I do. And Gurdjieff talks about the stairway, right? And where you have to reach down and try to pick someone else up to get them to your step. But at the same time, you need to have a hand on the step above you, someone that's helping you. So it creates like a chain. And I know that I've had, teachers that have been that person above me to help me up. And so I look at it just, I guess they can say responsibility, to then look down and pull others up as well. And then through that, we're all moving up, together to whoever's available and open to the challenge.
I'm out of questions. Anything else we should talk about?
That was good. That was a power hour.
All right. Well, this has been fantastic, Brian, and I hope the people listening get a sense of how interesting this particular Dharma is, and how consonant it is with a lot of what we understand now from a scientific point of view about body and neurology and adaptation and what we need as human beings. And I feel like the need to put physical effort front and center in the middle of spiritual and philosophical communities, that's very urgent, because otherwise they don't really have much contact with reality. And these are the communities that potentially offer the world the most in terms of dealing with the convergent crises that we're all facing. So we need those communities to have contact with reality, because we're counting on them to help us. And the body and the challenges of the body are one of the primary vehicles for that to happen. So it's important to me to foreground projects like these. Thank you very much for being here.
Hey, no problem. That was a blast. I just, I'm just now trying to get out and start, marketing or, promoting, talking to people and spreading the ideas. I mean, I'd say the past like 4 or 5 years, it was just me in the lab. And now I just sold a business a couple months ago. I was at a home restoration business. So now that that's gone, it's just like freed up like all this psychological space, and so now I'm taking that time and attention and talking to people such as yourself, who I feel like can really, lead good conversations. But I also want to make sure that who I'm talking to, they're also, the right type of people. And, I think the conversation we just had, proved that to get the ideas out, you need to be conversing with someone that has a good level of understanding. And that helps me, communicate my ideas. So I appreciate the time.